C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Book 1 is broken up into various chapters and parts of, and he begins with the question about right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe, but specifically the law of human nature. He says on page 16 that there is some kind of law or rule which they, that is, people in the past, agreed. They might, of course, fight like animals, but they could not quarrel in the human sense of the word. There was some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. Do you think that's correct?
Well, I would say that that is correct, but I recognise that in a world that we live in today, which is there is no right, there is no wrong, everything is shades of grey, that this would be seen as a very archaic way of viewing things. But I do believe that there is objective truth, which means that there is right and there is wrong.
There is the law of nature. He introduces quite a common theme, that the idea of the law of human nature. So he actually says a body could not choose whether it obeyed the law of gravitation or not. And the thumbnail is a lady just about to step off a cliff. But a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it. So there's two things. The law of nature. I'd love to sit at the bottom of the ocean with no breathing apparatus.
Yep.
Can't do it. This woman in the thumbnail is deciding to jump off, but she ain't Superman. She ain't going to float there. Gravity's going to take in, and she is going to fall. So I kind of guess most people will understand just by growing up that there are certain things that if you do, it's going to hurt. If you put your hand in a fire, it's going to hurt.
Yep.
Secondly, there is this, because it's nature and we are part of nature, but we're slightly different to nature. There is human nature. And according to C.S. Lewis, there's a law.
Yes. And I would say that he is absolutely right, because I would also posit that because there is a law of human nature, there is also a lawgiver.
I think that's where he's going to.
Yeah, and
it doesn't get there yet.
Yeah, but that's what I would say, that there is a lawgiver. As a result of there being a law, we fall into a certain pattern of behaviour. We fall into a certain way of behaving. And I think that while we may want to break out of it, this comes back to just being ego-driven.
Yes.
In my opinion.
So having set up the difference between the law of nature, such as gravity and other things, and the law of human nature, he's 6 things I'd just like to draw out in what he says in this quite short piece. It's only about 6 pages. Top of page 17, he says, the law of human nature, people thought that everyone knew it and did not need to be taught it. That's quite a common thing, isn't it? That it's plainly obvious that there's certain laws that humans must follow. And he assumes, or he says, and of course bear in mind he's writing this just as you're coming out of World War II, that it was obvious, wasn't it, that people knew that there was the law of human nature, that human idea of decent behaviour was obvious to everyone. Having come out of the war, I'm surprised he says that, because he then goes on to talk about the enemy were in the wrong, because right is a real thing, which the Nazis at bottom knew as well as we did, and by we he's talking the English, did and ought to have practised. If they had had no notion of what we mean by right, then though we might still have had to fight them, we could no more have blamed them for that than for the colour of their hair. Do we assume wrongly that everybody knows what is right and what is wrong?
I think that what we assume is that everybody agrees with our perception of what is right and what is wrong. So what I think is right must be what you think is right, and everybody knows that. I do think that there are commonalities amongst all of us that we could probably all stand on. Vast majority of us could stand on, but we would be able to say, yeah, those things are right. Those things are morally right, ethically right, or whatever. I don't know, there will be obviously some cultural differences in the way that we execute those things, but I think that most of humanity would agree that it is right to be truthful in your dealings with some, not everyone, but someone. Because you can be untruthful with your dealings with an enemy, but everybody would hold the belief that you can't be untruthful to everybody all of the time. So there must be a point where we all say we need to be truthful to that individual, whatever that truth happens to be encapsulated in.
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Interesting. He then goes on to, obviously with the Nazis, some people could be untaught what most people accept to be correct. Schadenfreude was this idea that people could chortle at the misfortunes of others. Well, that had to be almost indoctrinated into them to have accepted that. He then goes on and says, if anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teachings of, say, the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Hindus, the Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very like they are to each other and to our own. I mean, Christianity has inherited a moral teaching that is worldwide and ancient. So we must assume that then, therefore, this is a commonality. This is a thing that we all share as humans.
Yeah, and I do think that there is. I think that there are common truths that we hold on to. They may look slightly different, but there is that common foundation on which we stand. And I think his point is probably right there. Whether it's Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, or Romans, there is common ground, and it's identifying what that common ground is and standing on that.
And he finishes off talking about ego and vanity, but he calls it selfishness. He said, can you think of a country where people are admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him? You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 made 5. I think you only have to think of 1984.
Yeah.
And think otherwise.
Yeah.
But he has this really fine end to the part we're talking about. First, human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not, in fact, behave in that way. They often break the law of human nature. What do you think about that?
Well, do you ever recall when you were little walking into the kitchen, seeing the cookies on the side in a jar, looking to the left, looking to the right, looking behind you, making sure nobody was watching, shoving your hand in and nicking one and running off? Do you ever remember doing anything like that? And yet nobody told you that you shouldn't do that. You just knew that you shouldn't do that. There's a conscience that we have. We have a conscience which is wired into us. And I think that there are certain things that we do that we know at a very deep intrinsic level. And we don't need a crimes act to tell us that theft is wrong. We just know that theft is wrong. We know it. And I don't just think that that's a cultural thing. So there is something in us that we know how we ought to behave, which is that first point that he makes. We've got this curious idea that we ought to behave in this certain way, and we can't shake that off. We try and squash our conscience. We try and get rid of it. We try and forbid, justify it. We try and rationalize it. And then the other thing is, as he rightly points out, we don't behave in that way. We're always going against that small little voice saying, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And we go, oh no, poke it, I'm going to do it.
And we often try to convince ourselves that we're not committing a sin.
Well, we go into justification mode. So we justify, why shouldn't I do it? It's my life. I can choose to do what I want. And so we justify our actions rather than actually acknowledging that we have now broken the directive of that little small voice within us, rather than going, oh, that was bad, I won't do that again. And we don't even need to be told it's bad. We just know it. We just know it. I haven't had to be told that there were certain things that I've done and behaved were bad. I did it, and I did it knowingly, knowing that what I'm about to do is not good, what I'm about to do is bad, and to hell with it. I'm going to do it anyway, because it's all about me.
And what's interesting, that's the part of the law of human nature, which we'll finish at, but it's also to remind the listener that Book 1 is aiming at explaining the right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. Because he does go on to talk about some objections, which we'll talk about next time, and then the reality of the law.
Yes.
Fascinating book.
It's a fascinating book, mate. It stood the test, like I said last time, and I think that he had a very interesting insight into what makes people tick. And I love the fact that he was the most reluctant convert in Christendom who came kicking and screaming to the altar.
Well, there's probably no doubt people like that all around the world we don't know of. But
Oh, I've got no doubt.
he had the good grace to write about things.
He did indeed. Top chap.
Okay,
Thanks, mate.
we'll end it there for now.
Later. Bye-bye.
Ta-ta.